Hi, it's Dwyer, gamblersadvisory.com, a free site. Bettingangle.us, a free site. Today is Monday, October 10th, 2020. Let's talk heavyweight boxing. But first, remember, the opinion you should follow should be your own. Just consider this video to be a second opinion from a complete stranger online. Now, Ring Magazine did a great job coming up with their top 10 list of heavyweights. Tyson Fury should lead the list, but he did flirt with retirement, at least in public statements, so they excluded him. We all understand that the lineal is one of the 10 best heavyweights on the planet. In the top spot, they put Usyk. They rank them. We'll overlook the ranking. The idea is simply, does this guy belong among the elites at heavyweight? Right? We understand the sport is rock, paper, scissors. A guy can be a blessed fighter, but could have a style where one or two guys out there might be able to beat him, and those guys might be ranked lower than he is. We understand the way rankings work. So let's go down the list and let's just talk about possible matchups. Let's also talk about who could give some of the guys on the list problems. The list in order, going from 1st to 10th, is Anthony Joshua, Deontay Wilder, Joe Joyce, Andy Ruiz Jr., Dillian White, Luis Ortiz, Joseph Parker, Philippe Ergovic, Frank Sanchez, and Zhang Zhili. Now, let me just say, this list is excellent. I would argue that since Deontay Wilder did better against Tyson Fury than Anthony Joshua did against Alexander Usyk, and since Wilder's only lost to one man, and that's Tyson Fury, I would argue that Deontay Wilder should be ranked ahead of Anthony Joshua. Now, let me just say, if the two fought, right, ranking is different than who you think wins the fight. In terms of career achievement, and you can let me have it in the comment section of this video, but in terms of career achievement, 5-year heavyweight champion Deontay Wilder, in my opinion, should be placed above Anthony Joshua. But if the two guys fought, I believe Joshua wins because Joshua is two-handed. Wilder relies too much on his right hand. Joshua does have a jab and would likely win the slow rounds, which matters, right? And the pacing of the fight, Wilder fights all have the same pacing, right? I don't think Wilder would be able to deviate from that pacing. So while I would take Joshua over Wilder in a head-to-head matchup, if I were asked to rate the fighters, Deontay Wilder would be rated ahead of Anthony Joshua. Let's talk about some other people. And it's interesting. One of the best times to grab a fighter when you're betting is after that fighter has lost a fight. Right? People hear that the fighter has lost a fight and they drop that guy in their ratings and their assessment of the guy's future chances. Now, you just had 2 fights where the 2 guys who lost put up heroic matches, right? Heroic. If you saw the fight, you understood that on a different night against the same opponent, the guy who lost might actually win. Now, the Andy Ruiz-Luis Ortiz fight should have been an eye-opener for folks. Right? Andy does legitimately knock Luis Ortiz down twice. Okay, fine. You know, those knockdowns really were the margin of victory. But just understand, it was the older man who was fresher in the 12th round. Understand, it was the older man taking the slow rounds. Understand, too, that great chins hide a lot. Andy Ruiz got hit with some hellacious shots. I mean, heavy shots. When the shots landed, I was unsure whether Andy's knees were going to buckle. And Andy took the shots because Andy has a great chin. Right? But really the revelation in that fight, and Andy, because he won the fight, wins count. Right? Because he won the head-to-head, Andy should be ranked ahead of Luis Ortiz. I'm not disputing that at all. But what I am saying is Luis Ortiz is a southpaw. Luis Ortiz showed you in that Andy Ruiz fight that he could handle hand speed, right? Andy has the fastest hands in the heavyweight division in my eyes today, even over Usyk, right? Luis Ortiz showed you he could handle hand speed. He also showed you he was a big-time puncher. Something is discouraging Andy Ruiz, who gets an early knockdown. I know they gave him a second one. We'll ignore the second one, right? Because that really wasn't a knockdown. But Andy gets the early knockdown, has the faster hands, and yet is discouraged from jumping into the pocket. Now, I would argue that while Andy won the fight, Andy looked uncomfortable against the skilled southpaw. So I don't believe Andy's ready for Alexander Usyk. But I would argue that Luis Ortiz showed you that he is a hard-hitting southpaw. Let me also point out, too, you have Zhang Zhili. I know Ring refers to him as Zhili Zhang. What I want are fans from Asia to tell us which one is right. I've seen both written out. But understand, Luis Ortiz has the faster foot speed than Zhang Zhili. I believe both men, because they're hard-hitting southpaws, would have a better shot against Usyk than someone who's unfamiliar or uncomfortable with southpaws. Right? So, let's just say Luis Ortiz on Ring's list is ranked 6th. Let's put him in perspective. I believe against Anthony Joshua, that fight's a toss-up. I have no doubt that the casino would make Joshua a bigger than 2-1 favorite. I have no doubt about that. So, now's the time to figure out fights when stuff's not announced, when stuff's not even being discussed. In my head, I know that Luis Ortiz, and he's in his 40s, right? 43. I know that Luis Ortiz would give Joshua a rough time. Joshua just lost twice to a southpaw. Right? Joshua has a problem, in my opinion. I don't care what happened in that Charles Martin fight. Joshua has a problem with southpaws who can box. Luis Ortiz, in addition to being very heavy-handed, can box. Right? Luis Ortiz against Joshua would not be conceding the slow rounds. Also, Luis Ortiz has fought far more right-handed fighters than Joshua has fought left-handed fighters. I would take Luis Ortiz over Dillian Whyte. Right? Guys who rely on their jabs get thrown off by guys who come in with a different dominant hand. Dillian Whyte relies on his jab. I believe that would go out the window against southpaw Luis Ortiz. Right? Dillian Whyte likes a pocket, likes to trade, likes to hit you in the body. Right? You tell Luis Ortiz that the other guy likes the pocket, and Luis Ortiz is going to laugh. And he's going to welcome the exchange because Luis Ortiz is a master boxer. Let's talk about one where it's a little bit dangerous. Joe Joyce. Now, Joe Joyce looked magnificent. Against Joseph Parker. Right? But Joe Joyce is front foot heavy. Joe Joyce has an excellent jab that opens the door for him. What happens if he's not able to land that jab with regularity? Because he's facing a southpaw and the angles are different. Let me just say this too. Luis Ortiz has gone down in some recent fights. Okay, fair enough. He used to be known as having a great chin. Joe Joyce, of course, is known as having a great chin. I'm just telling you, a chin is great until it's not. I've seen a number of fighters who you hear the guy's a great chin. Of course, the guy's in his 20s. Then as the guy gets older and gets hit in that chin enough times, eventually it gives out. Joe Joyce against Luis Ortiz is a competitive fight. Like the Joshua Ortiz fight, I have no doubt that if they announced that fight, Joe Joyce would be a prohibitive favorite. Right? Joyce is younger by several years than Luis Ortiz. You can't say that for most of the guys on the list. Right? In reference to Joyce, who's in his late 30s. But you can with regard to 40-something Luis Ortiz. But Luis Ortiz has stamina. Luis Ortiz lands big shots. Luis Ortiz can handle a guy whose game plan is constant pressure. Right? So, I like the names on this list. I don't care what Luis Ortiz is ranked. I don't care what Zhang Zhili is ranked. Right? Joe Joyce could not fight Zhang the way he fought Joseph Parker. Let's talk about Parker too. You know, boxing is part of sports. Right? Having great athleticism helps. Now, I thought Joseph Parker did enough to give himself a chance to beat Joe Joyce. Folks, he landed some big shots in that fight. Some huge shots. Dare I say, the fight he had against Joe Joyce was one of his best fights. I thought Parker was on his A game. Now, he lost that fight, but here's the thing. I'm looking at this list, and I'm just telling you that Joseph Parker, right, foot speed, upper body movement, punching power, coordination, is a better athlete than most of the guys on this list. Right now, I believe Joseph Parker gives most of the guys on this list serious problems. Right? I'm not sure whether Deontay Wilder, who is one of the top-ranked heavyweights in the world, would be able to deal with Parker's athleticism. Understand, too, Parker's two-handed. I know you didn't see a lot of his left in the Joe Joyce fight, but he's two-handed. Right? Joe Joyce, the juggernaut, fought Parker at a pace that I don't believe, a sustained pace, that I don't believe Deontay Wilder could match. Right? So I have no doubt that for Joseph Parker's next fight, and let's hope he fights someone big, because that's where gamblers would get the best advantage. Right? I'm guessing in Parker's next fight, because of the fact that he got stopped by the juggernaut in something like round 11, I'm guessing they're going to make him a big underdog. Right? Let me just say, none of the guys on this list, and that includes Joshua, who beat Parker earlier, we're told. That includes Dillian Whyte, who beat Parker. Right? None of the guys on this list deserve to be a big favorite over Joseph Parker. Right? If you see anything north of a minus 200, the Parker side of the play is the side of the play. Let's talk about another athlete, and he's dangerous. We just don't know enough about him because he hasn't been in the ring with some of the other guys. Right? Understand, in reference to Joseph Parker, well, Parker's been in against Dillian Whyte, against Anthony Joshua. We've now seen him against Joe Joyce. So we have the lay of the land somewhat on Parker in big fights. We know he's competitive. Frank Sanchez is a little bit of a mystery, isn't he? Here's the thing I know about Frank Sanchez. Sanchez, who doesn't hit as hard, in my opinion, as Joseph Parker, but who's smooth. Sanchez is a better athlete. Moves faster, is more sudden, right? Can jump in, can jump out, can win slow rounds, has the faster hand speed than Zhang Zhili, than Dillian Whyte, than Andy Ruiz. Right now, Sanchez, according to Ring, is ranked number 9, and that's on a list that doesn't include Tyson Fury. Right? When you see a guy like Sanchez, and there's a little mystery because you're not quite sure how this guy is going to cope with elite competition, but you see the athleticism, you see the fact that the guy's fast-handed, you see the fact that the guy can throw combinations, you see the fact that the guy is two-handed. Right? He's a guy who might be able to pull an upset, especially over some of the guys, Deontay Wilder, for example, who don't move that well. Right? Let me say this too. Boxing's a young man's game. Right? Most of these guys are over 30. Right? Most of them. They're specialists. Right? Now, heavyweights do age more slowly than everyone else. But it is a bit glaring that you have 3 guys on this list who are over 35. Right? Zhang, Luis Ortiz, Joe Joyce. Right? I believe Deontay Wilder's right around 35. Right? By heavyweight standards historically, this is an older group. Now, we just saw, and I understand, the fight shook a lot of people up. Zhang dropped Philippe Ergovic with his offhand, right hand. Right? Ergovic hits the canvas early. Ergovic then struggles against Zhang. Looks as lost against the southpaw as Andy Ruiz did against Ortiz. Then Ergovic steps on the gas in the closing rounds, shows you why he's Filip Hrgović and wins the fight. Right now, let me just say, that's probably Hrgovic's worst fight in his career. Right? Hrgović has younger legs. He has younger reflexes. He's a combination puncher. Right? He's already sparred with some of these guys. There's a tape on YouTube of him sparring with Deontay Wilder. Right? I'm just telling you that Hrgović would give Usyk, would give Wilder all they can handle. Right? There are some questions since Hrgović wilted. Didn't seem to have the stamina against Zhang. There are some questions against Hrgović, for Hrgović against someone like Joe Joyce, who had a lot of stamina even at the end of the Joseph Parker fight. Right? I believe Hrgović, who's ranked 8th by Ring, is the heir apparent. Right? He just moves much better than Anthony Joshua does. And I consider Joshua to be a cautious athlete. I believe he has the athleticism, but he's the guy who in the car doesn't want to drive faster than 55 miles an hour. Right? He's cautious. He needs a clear day to fly the plane. Right? Hrgović is more of a risk taker. Right? Understand, I believe Hrgović might be able to beat most of the guys on this list because he had a problem, and it was pronounced against Southpaw Zhang Zhili. If I were him, I would stay away from Luis Ortiz. I would stay away from Usyk right now. Right? Hrgović, let's just say I have more confidence in Hrgović against right-handed fighters than I do against left-handed fighters at this moment in time. Right? Let me close by saying this. Usyk was riffing. And of course, reporters were listening because he's one of the heavyweight champions of the world. People listen to you when you have the belt. And Usyk was talking about people he'd fight. And he mentioned Canelo's name. Now, it might shock some people, right? But understand, I was alive. I was around. Many of you were too. When Michael Spinks, a light heavyweight, not even a cruiserweight, he was a light heavyweight, gained weight to fight a great heavyweight champion, Larry Holmes. And he beat Holmes twice. At least that's what the judges tell us. Right? I would question the first fight. But just to understand, I've seen a guy jump from 175, fight a heavyweight, and beat him, and not have the gifts. In fact, I've seen it more than once. Spinks didn't have the physical gifts Roy Jones Jr., who also did it, had. Right? Didn't have the physical gifts. Roy Jones, when you saw him in against John Ruiz, you realized Jones at that moment in his life just had superhuman hand speed. Jones was just too fast. Understand, Michael Spinks, different fighter, great fighter, Hall of Famer. Only lost to one man, and that's Mike Tyson. Understand, he fought Jerry Cooney. Forget Larry Holmes. After he beats Holmes, he fights Jerry Cooney, drops him, wins by stoppage. Michael Spinks is one of boxing royalty, great fighter. But understand, Michael Spinks beat you with savvy, with cunningness, with timing. He had a punch, they called it the Spinks jinx. He wasn't the guy like Roy Jones who you just saw him sparring and you thought, man, is this guy for real? Is this guy this fast? He wasn't superhuman. He was a tactician. Now, Canelo, I don't believe Canelo has a chance against Usyk, not because of size, right? I've also seen smaller heavyweight champions. You heard me mention Tyson, right? Let's name three of the best. Smoking Joe Frazier, Rocky Marciano, right? Those guys were smaller guys. I've seen smaller guys succeed at heavyweight. A smaller guy might actually turn his height into an advantage at heavyweight, right? By being able to fight out of a crouch. You know who fought out of a crouch? Rocky Marciano. I understand. Before I get a bevy of responses here, I understand Canelo is shorter than the guys I've just named, right? But what would do Canelo in against Usyk? And Canelo has a great left hook. Usyk's a southpaw who likes to hang on your left side. But there's a foot speed gap there. Canelo is not the athlete that Alexander Usyk is. Right? He's just not. That's what would do in Canelo. Right? An interesting fight would be Canelo against Joe Joyce. I know people are cringing. I know I'm going to hear that Joe Joyce weighed in the 270s for his last fight, and, asking Canelo to, be a heavyweight would be asking a lot. I need to have people understand that Canelo used to spar regularly with Frank Sanchez, who's on the list, rings list. Right? Canelo has been in the ring against top 10 heavyweights. Now, Canelo also has a mobile upper body, very hard to hit in the head. I want people to revisit the Danny Jacobs fight. Right? It's a big ask to have Joe Joyce on his front foot throwing his clubbing shots on a guy who is going to want Joyce in the pocket, because Canelo needs Joyce to stay away from his jab, right? Canelo wants to be able to hit the other guy. He doesn't want to be running into a jab the whole fight. He doesn't want it to turn into the David Tua, Lennox Lewis fight. Canelo needs a heavyweight who's going to want to trade with him, right? Now, while Joyce might be too big, and while Canelo would probably have a hard time hitting Joyce in the head, let's just say Joyce got hit with some bombs by Joseph Parker. Joyce, who's savvy, isn't defensively blessed. Right? I would argue that Canelo would have more luck against a stay in the pocket, front foot heavyweight like Joyce than he would a mobile heavyweight like Alexander Usyk. Right? Canelo, Tyson, Fury, that's uncompetitive, because again, you would see the mobile part of Tyson Fury, where you would realize that Fury's a bigger man, much bigger man than most of these heavyweights, and Fury can lean backward. So even if he and Canelo were close to each other, it would be hard to hit Fury in the head, and Fury is somewhat defensively blessed. Right? But I need for people to figure out that you've had middleweights, Bob Fitzsimmons, right? Boxing Hall of Famer. I'm naming great fighters. You've had middleweights jump to the heavyweight division and win the title. Right? You've had a middleweight, Stanley Ketchel, drop Jack Johnson in a fight, right? Something most couldn't do. The middleweight champ drops Jack Johnson in a fight, only to have Johnson drop him moments later. Right? Size is not everything in boxing. right? Technique matters. So, to this list, I want to add 2 cruiserweights because I believe they would give some of these guys a hard time. Lawrence Okolie has a jab that's so good, I openly wonder how someone with slower feet, he has faster hands, but he has slow feet, Andy Ruiz, would be able to cope with Okolie's jab. What I want people to realize too is Maris Briedis destroyed Manuel Charr. I want you to look at that fight and then ask yourself the question of whether he would have a shot to destroy a Dillian Whyte, who's ranked 5th on this list. Let me say too, they recently had a Hall of Fame class and James Toney was on it. I need for people to understand that James Toney actually went up to heavyweight and should have won a share of the heavyweight title, but they stripped him because Toney was on, according to the testers, PEDs. Right? Okay, fine. Just understand that you've had guys at lighter weights with physical attributes who've become heavyweight champ, Roy Jones. But you've also had guys like James Toney, who wasn't the fastest handed guy, had supreme timing, was an elite counterpuncher. Understand, James Toney, on one of the better nights of boxing, stopped Evander Holyfield. Right? That's the same James Toney who was fighting down at middleweight when he was a younger man. Right? Fighting people like Michael Nunn. Think about it. Here's James Toney. He fought both Mike McCallum and Evander Holyfield. Right? This heavyweight list, as good as it is, has some older guys. Again, guy over 40 is on this list. Luis Ortiz. Right? Multiple guys over 35. Has some older guys, has some big clunky guys, right? I know Joe Joyce is compensated for slower hand speed, right? But just understand, there are going to be some guys, Maris Briedis, who are in the ring who realize they have faster hand speed than him and might be able to slip the jab, right? So, while I love lists, right? You look on the list and you say, Luis Ortiz is the 6th best heavyweight in the world according to this list. Let's use common sense. Boxing is rock, paper, scissors. There are going to be some nights where a Joseph Parker and a Luis Ortiz coming off losses will be just too much, just too athletic, or just too left-handed for bigger, higher-ranked opponents. And there are going to be some nights where you're looking at the fight and you're thinking to yourself, I did not know Frank Sanchez, who's unbeaten as I make this video, was this good. Let me also say, too, Michael Hunter, who's not on this list, I privately would take over several of these guys. Right? Don't fall in love with boxing rankings. That's how I see it. Let me hear from you. If there are other heavyweights, Big Baby Anderson is not on this list. Right? I know times are thin in America. I'm just telling you. You look at a young guy in his mid-20s against some of these older guys. We've seen this happen too often in boxing. And that young guy might be faster than you think, might be crisper than you think. The fight might become a war of attrition, and the young guy might actually have the stamina edge. over the older, savvy pro, the KG vet, the technician, right? And of course, Tony Yoka, Olympic gold medalist. They tell us he beat Joe Joyce. They tell us he beat Philip Ergovic. He's not on this list. Is that right? I know he has a great trainer, Virgil Hunter from the Bay Area. Let me give Hunter a shout out here. Let me give the Bay Area a shout out here. Right? I know Yoka has a superstar trainer, just like Anthony Joshua does, just like several of the guys on this list have. Right? I know. Many of you, like me, looked at the Olympics and thought, what? they're not giving Ergovic this fight? Okay, I know. Yoka has critics. But does he belong on this list? Who would you take in Yoka against Frank Sanchez? Let me hear from you. I look forward to your comments in the comment section of this video. Understand, let me applaud the ring. Let me applaud others who try to rank heavyweights. Right? The real beauty in this list is it gets us talking. It gets us excited about heavyweight boxing. Right? As I said earlier in this video, the time to think about who you would take in fights is before they're even discussed. I'm just telling you, I was extremely impressed by Luis Ortiz and by Joseph Parker. Right? Neither guy got his hand raised at the end. Okay, fine. That's fine. I wouldn't want to take Luis Ortiz's left hand. I thought Parker landed the kind of shots that would knock down most men. Right? So I know if I'm in a casino and they announce a fight and I see Joseph Parker's name or I see Luis Ortiz's name against anybody on the list, and they're going off at greater than plus 200, I'll be the casino's Huckleberry. I know I'm getting talent. I know I'm getting great odds. Anyway, that's how I see it. Let me hear from you. Thanks for stopping by. I look forward to reading your comments.